Chapter 31. Kind, yet cold-hearted. Is it because that last coin didn't go in? When Leila heard that Duke Gerhard would be returning to Arvis, the first thing she thought of was the last throw she had made at the fountain, when the coin had missed the basin. She was certain she had heard that the Duke was going to spend another year serving in the Imperial Guard, and yet now she was learning that this wasn't the case anymore. Instead, he was going to tie up any loose ends in the capital, then move back to Arvis where he would live full-time. The elderly Dowager Gerhard wanted her grandson to live with her, looking after the estate, and it seemed that he could no longer ignore her wish. Well, I don't care, Leila thought as she stretched her arms before tying her apron tightly around her waist. His life is no longer of any concern to me. I'm just a little upset that that last coin he gave me missed the basin after I wished that I would never see him again. After leaving Arvis the previous summer, he had not visited at all for an entire year. She had assumed this pattern would continue until his military service was complete. As long as she moved away from Arvis before then, her wish would have come true. Shaking her head, she stepped out of the cottage into the backyard. Maybe my wish will come true anyway. The Duke is returning, but I'm moving away from here. Breathing a sigh of relief, she tended to the animals and the vegetable garden. Just as she was finishing up her morning chores, her pigeon Phoebe returned from the Etmans' house. A note from Kyle was wrapped around her ankle. My mom wants to invite you to dinner tonight. See, Leila? I was right. She felt like she could hear Kyle's voice behind the words of the note. To calm Leila's concerns, he had guaranteed that his mother was going to come around to liking her eventually. He had assured her that everything was going to turn out all right, that by the fall they would be a married couple strolling the university campus together. They would be happy. Very happy.
Uncle Bill, I'm going to go to the Etmans for dinner tonight,
she said, hurrying towards Bill as he arrived back at the cottage.
Mrs. Etman invited me.
Oh, see Leila?
He cheerfully replied, saying the same thing Kyle had said in his note.
Didn't I tell you everything would turn out all right?
She smiled at the sight of his smile. Her heart was pounding, which she chalked up to the excitement. Matias returned to Arvis late one afternoon. As his car pulled up in front of the mansion, a sense of nervous anticipation spread throughout the staff members lined up to greet him. His reception was nothing out of the ordinary. He was politely greeted by all the staff, as well as his joyful grandmother and smiling mother. Out of habit, as he passed by the gardener, he looked down at the ground. Next to the large boots the gardener was wearing, there was a small pair of feet in simple brown shoes. Leila Llewellyn was always by Bill Remmer's side. He knew this would no longer be the case after this summer, however. He passed by the garden without turning his head. He was looking forward in the direction of the staircase at the far end of the mansion's main hall.
I see your bird has returned with you as well,
Elise von Gerhard remarked with a laugh, as she saw a servant holding the golden birdcage that housed the canary that her son had taken with him when he had left Arvis the previous summer.
How strange. You never wanted a puppy or any other pet as a child, and now you cherish that bird so much.
If you're interested in birds now, why don't we expand the greenhouse and bring in some more different types of birds?
Dowager Gerhard suggested, smiling.
That won't be necessary, grandmother,
Matias replied, smiling back at her.
One is enough for me.
After this dry response, he walked into the mansion. Before ascending the staircase, he looked up at the grand chandelier and at the Gerhard family crest imprinted on the ceiling. He had been born underneath that crest. He was living underneath that crest, and one day he would draw his last breath underneath that crest. This fact felt entirely natural to him. He lowered his gaze again and walked up the stairs. If he was going to end his service this year, why did he say before that he was going to extend it for another year? Countess Brandt grumbled, barely trying to hide her irritation. She had only suggested that they postpone the wedding by a year out of respect for Duke Gerhard's decision to continue his military service. If she had known how things were actually going to turn out, she would have seen to it that the wedding happened before the end of the summer. I didn't realize that Matias was so capricious.
Even though the wedding has been postponed, it's still nice that he's returning to Arvis early, Mother.
Claudine replied, not looking disappointed in the least. You certainly seem relaxed about the whole thing. Meanwhile, I can't help but feel upset that my daughter's wedding won't be happening this year.
Why are you upset? Rather than having a rushed slapdash ceremony, won't it be better to hold one later on, so that we can have enough time to prepare everything just right?
A year is a long time, Claudine. Don't you realize all that can happen in that time?
I don't know, Mother. Think back on the last year. It went by in a flash, and nothing much happened. This next year will just be a repeat of that. And anyway, with Duke Gerhard living at Arvis full-time, the wedding preparations will go even more smoothly.
Claudine, men cannot be trusted, and unlike a marriage, an engagement is not a binding agreement.
We're not talking about just any man, Mother. We're talking about Matias von Gerhard.
Claudine was calmly smiling now.
He will never love anyone other than himself.
Claudine might have been feeling just as uneasy as her mother was if she hadn't heard the news that Leila and the doctor's son were going to be married. With Leila Llewellyn out of the picture, she saw no need for the excessive concern her mother was displaying.
For him, this engagement is also a matter of family pride. There's nothing that can get in the way of that,
she said decisively as she threaded the needle through her embroidery frame. Kind yet cold-hearted. This was how Matias had behaved ever since he was a child. While Claudine's other cousins had played pranks on her and called her names, Matias had always been polite and kind to her. This had been nice, but it had also made him seem more distant and difficult to relate to. Sometimes she wondered if he even had emotions at all. She found it hard to picture him angry, sad, happy, or worried. It seemed more likely that he would look upon the world with the same graceful, yet arrogant smile till the day he died. This was exactly what she wanted out of him.
I should visit Arvis next week,
she said, standing up from the sofa feeling refreshed.
I can see Duke Gerhard, and I can congratulate my friend on her upcoming marriage. 2 birds with 1 stone.
A friend with an upcoming wedding? Oh no. You mean that orphan girl the gardener is taking care of? Are you really calling her your friend? Countess Brandt asked, looking aghast. Claudine flashed a carefree smile.
Leila is my friend. My old friend. I should get a wedding gift for her.
After lengthy deliberation, Leila put on the white dress she had purchased for her trip to take the exam in Rats. She neatly braided her hair, then tied it with her favorite ribbon. She had been to the Ettmans' home before, but she felt even more nervous than she had felt the first time, both because she and Kyle were now engaged, and because his mother had extended the invitation to her this time.
How do I look, Uncle Bill?
She asked, walking out of her room, lazily smoking a cigarette as he sat on the sill of an open window. He chuckled as he looked at her.
Ha ha ha. With marriage ahead of you, I see that you're more interested in dressing fancy than you ever were before.
It's not that, Uncle. I'm just nervous about seeing Mrs. Ettman.
You've got nothing to be nervous about. Haven't you already met her a few times before?
Sure, but tonight is special.
Well, you look flawless, so don't worry.
Stubbing out his cigarette, he stood up and smiled warmly at her.
Just be yourself, Leila. That's enough.
He patted her on the shoulder, and his hand felt just as warm as his smile. While she knew his assessment was biased since he loved her so much, she smiled back at him and nodded. Only after calming down thanks to his words did she realize how anxious she had been all day. Just then, Kyle arrived.
Kyle, how do I...
You look perfect.
He confidently replied, not even letting her finish the question.
You look like yourself, and that's enough.
He was warmly smiling, just like Bill.
That's all I ever want from you, Leila.
Another guy was just telling me the same thing,
she replied, giggling as she observed the similarities between Kyle and Bill's facial expressions and remarks.
What? Who? What guy were you talking to?
Stop with the nonsense and get going, you loafer,
Bill said, slapping Kyle's back. Kyle stumbled a bit from the unexpected blow, then looked back at Bill with a frown.
But Mr. Rimmer, some jerk has been talking to Leila.
I am that jerk, you dummy.
So I just think... Wait, what?
You ill-mannered loafer. I'm going to have to seriously consider whether it's a good idea to let you have Leila after all.
Despite his threateningly blunt words, Bill was patting Kyle's shoulder very gently and warmly. Leila watched from a few steps back as the two men squabbled. Those two men were the two people she loved most in the whole world. The two most precious people to her. The two people she never wanted to lose. A smile slowly formed on her face, and joy suffused her heart. Uncle Bill and Kyle always had that effect on her. She couldn't imagine life without them. This was why she had finally decided to marry Kyle, after hesitating for so long. With each day that he had proposed to her, and she had rejected him, things had grown more awkward between them. If she couldn't accept his love, then it was only right for a distance to form between them. He had tried as hard as he could to close that gap, but since he had already proposed to her, there were only two options remaining to them: get married or stop seeing each other entirely. Her wish for them to remain good friends, while becoming no more than that, had become impossible the moment he had first proposed to her. Deep down she had known this, and it had pained her throughout the previous autumn, winter and spring. Marriage, and all the rest of the future life that Kyle had talked to her about, had seemed like a vague, far-off notion to her. She didn't like the idea of excessive desire either. She had made this resolution in the late spring, the same day that Duke Hareheart had insulted her and made her cry. Not wanting to hold on to anything he had given her, she had thrown all his gold coins into the fountain. The moment she had looked into Kyle's eyes after he came looking for her, she had made up her mind. The look in his eyes had made her forget all her pain and sorrow. It reminded her of the cozy light of the cottage. So many times, walking down the dark forest path at night, she had seen the warm light of the cottage, and had felt deep reassurance knowing that Bill was there waiting for her, ready to comfort her from whatever pain or sadness the world had inflicted on her. That evening by the fountain, Kyle's eyes had given her the same warm, cozy feeling. As always, Kyle and Bill's meaningless squabble ended with both of them laughing heartily. Still chuckling, Kyle turned and extended his hand towards her.
Let's go, Leila.
While she still wasn't used to these new displays of affection that had started after she had accepted his proposal, she didn't shake off his hand. She didn't want to lose him.
AudiosKoppo